The presence of Italian artists in Siam and in Thailand has been very important. In the past century, several Italian artists and architects worked in Siam and created outstanding works of art. Italian tradition, expertise, style, and technology represented the Western excellence, but Italians have also contributed to the birth of modern Thai art. Between 1870 and 1932, many Italian architects, engineers, and artists worked in Bangkok, built and decorated some of the most beautiful and representative buildings of the capital of Siam. Still today, when you stroll in Bangkok, you can see monuments and buildings created by Italians. Among the architects, engineers, and artists, we can remember Mario Tamagno, Ercole Manfredi, both from the Accademia Albertina of Turin, Carlo Allegri, the painters Galileo Chini and Cesare Ferro, again from the Accademia Albertina, and many others. The presence of Italian artists has been documented but has not been enough studied, above all from the aesthetic point of view and from the point of view of its intercultural relevance. The case of the Italian artist and professor Corrado Feroci was different. Corrado Feroci was born 1892 and studied at the Academy of Art in Florence. Then he won a competition of the government of Siam and he came to Thailand. He was hired as a sculptor by the Department of Fine Arts. During his activity, he sculpted several statues of kings, created monuments, and organized art exhibitions. In 1932, he became the director of the School of Arts. He organized the school like the Academy of Florence and taught Western art to his students. In 1943, the school became the Silpakorn University. Corrado Feroci received the Thai nationality and adopted the Thai name of Silpa Bhirasri. The first and most prestigious Thai University of Fine Arts has been created by an Italian. The idea of studying modern Western art, of cultivating individual style and creativity, represented a completely new attitude towards art and creativity. Actually, traditional concepts of Thai art, artists, and artistic creativity were very different from the Western and Italian ones. Italian and Western aesthetics privileges categories such as creativity, originality, subjectivity, and the role of the author. Thai, and to a certain extent Eastern attitude to art, privileges tradition, imitation, formalization. Today, Corrado Feroci is considered as the father of modern Thai art. The point was not to propose a technique or an Italian style which could be replicated in Thailand. The point was to teach the spirit of artistic creation, understanding the cultural aspect and constitutive differences of the aesthetic experience. Feroci reflected on art and, in doing so, he proposed an intercultural approach to aesthetics. Under this aspect, it is very interesting how he considers Thai traditional art. Thai traditional art is basically Buddhist art. The Buddhism in Thailand is Theravada. Corrado Feroci wrote an interesting essay on Buddhist sculpture, in which he focuses on the specificity of Theravada sculpture. Theravada Buddhism may seem to be critical towards any kind of aesthetic experience. Beauty is nothing but appearance, and it testifies to the general impermanence of things. Beauty is a delusion, which increases suffering. Actually, Theravada Buddhism can offer a different and peculiar perspective on art and beauty. The experience of the work of art in the frame of Theravada Buddhism conveys some moral and practical aspects which are not present or which have been concealed in the tradition of Western aesthetics. Buddhist culture lacks of originality, individual creativity, and variety of subjects. There was the belief that an image of the Buddha has been created during his lifetime. This image absorbed much of the Buddha's magical power. All the following images were supposed to contain their own share of the magical power, which depended on the likeness to the original. For the artist, the point was to be as close as possible to the supposed original, and so to the iconographic pattern, canonical proportions, gestures, and so on. In Theravada Buddhism, creative artistic invention was not relevant, and art was expected to preserve and repeat old patterns. Art was a very conservative activity. Actually, the image is not a representation of the Buddha, but rather a representation from the Buddha, and a consequence of his power.
Actually, from a Western point of view, a lack of originality, variety, individualism, creativity, a too rigid respect for tradition could be blamed on Thai traditional artists. Nevertheless, we cannot consider this a limit of the Buddhist aesthetics. Originality and creativity are not the only aesthetic categories we can use. The Eastern experience of the work of art is more likely describable as one of an attitude, of a state of mind, which is mediated by the presence of the work of art. The artistic object is rather a conventional object, whose presence triggers or favors the attitude or the state of mind. Corrado Feroci explains the essence of Buddhist sculpture from the point of view of the artist. Feroci's idealistic attitude owes something to Hegel, but to Hegel's aesthetics or lectures on fine arts. The spiritual content is presented in a material form.
The Sukhothai images of the Buddha have a particular character, which seems to render immaterial the heavy bronze of which they are made. Yet, this spirituality does not destroy the sculptural qualities of the statues. The human forms are simplified and idealized. There is not disharmony between the abstract idea and its material realization. The work of art represents the whole culture, its religion, life, spiritual values, abstract ideas, in a material form, which expresses how people experience these values, combining spiritualism with naturalism, abstraction with realism. The artist uses an abstract form to deliver a concrete feeling. In order to understand this, we should be able to share the same point of view of the artist. The artist judges from an aesthetic point of view, while the archaeologists and historians judge from scientific principles. I propose the aesthetic point of view and the attempt to analyze the artistic value of Buddha images. On one side, Feroci agrees with the assumption that Buddhist culture lacks of originality and creativity. He says that the presence of rigid canons in the representation of the Buddha was against the production of original works and, at the same time, created the habit of copying or imitating. Imitation instead of creation became the rule. On the other side, when we judge a Buddha image, we must not be influenced by historical, archaeological, scientific categorization. But we must apply standards that take into consideration the real aesthetic, artistic, and emotive values of the work. Does Feroci state the superiority of Western art and creativity? Not at all. The aesthetic approach is not the one which creates categories. If we adopt the point of view of the artist, the work of art is supposed to convey a new attitude, a state of mind mediated by the presence of the work. A Buddha image is a conventional, traditional form because it has to convey an abstract content. A Buddha image is not a real portrait of the Lord Buddha, but the portraiture of his doctrine. It is the very spirit of the Buddhist religion that the artist has to convey in human form. Accordingly, we are to understand that this form is not intended to be realistic, but it is idealized and spiritualized, for otherwise it would not suggest an abstract idea.
Theravada Buddhist sculpture does not propose any attempt to represent reality. The representation concerns an abstract idea, and the physical representation of the Buddha is an abstract representation as well, to avoid any misleading idea. In this way, Feroci not only mediated Thai art to a Western audience, but he proposed some ideas which are accepted in the contemporary art debate. As Robert Fisher has written, the Sukhothai Buddha, the Sukhothai Buddha image praised by Feroci, presents a unified blend of grace and abstraction. It is the most abstract of the images of the Buddha. Feroci suggested that an intercultural approach to art is possible if we share the aesthetic perspective or the point of view of the artist, rather than one of the historian or the one of the antiquarian. Scientific categorization does not always help in understanding art. The main question is, what is the aim of this work of art? Art can only be understood in its specific function, in its specific cultural context. In the intercultural context, originality may assume different forms.
The Buddha image does not reveal anything visible, nor anything beyond the world of appearances, like in the Western romantic concept of work of art, but it is rather the intuition of a mood, which implies ethical discipline, contemplation, calm, and soulfulness. We can call it an attitude, or better, a behavior. Maybe we can compare it to the Aristotelian concept of catharsis. The experience of catharsis has an effect on the audience because it provokes a new condition, a new emotional state, a different attitude towards the world. Art has a value because of its effect on human beings, and the adequate way to consider a work of art, especially if it belongs to a very different culture, is the point of view of the artist, who knows the specific function, the aim of the work. Corrado Feroci's approach to art and culture, written in a few scattered articles, deserves much more study and much more attention. It offers an intercultural perspective developed in the field, which can be very fruitful.